Good day, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are, to all of you that joined us. I see numbers very high, so I'm very happy to see many people today here. Welcome to this new episode of our C.O.R.E series. We are here today to host a different kind of webinar. We don't have a topic, we don't have a presentation. We're just here. We have collected some of your questions. We will collect more of your questions, and we are here to answer to all the questions that we will receive. As you see, we have here quite a good bunch of people. I will introduce each of them to you in a few seconds, or they will introduce themselves. But first of all, let's tell me that we are live in this moment on Facebook. So I tell it now. I hope there will be people who will join us on Facebook later, but just to let you know, if you're watching us on Facebook, we will not answer to your questions. We will answer to all the questions that we will receive through Zoom. So for all the people that submit, that subscribed and are watching us on Facebook, on Zoom, we will, you will be able to use the box, the button below. You can see a button with Q&A there. You can post your questions. There will be my friend Dylan from Denver, Colorado, who will select them, who will watch them. We will try, of course, compatibly with the time that we have, we will try to answer to each and all of them. But of course, it will probably not be possible, because I see there already at this moment almost 143 people connected. So if just one question for each one would be too long to answer. A few words about me, and then I will let all my friends to introduce themselves. Now, my name is Fabrizio Gagliardi. You can see in my box. I am training manager for RUPES. I work in Milan. I am a chemist. I've been studying chemistry for years, and then I've been working in paint companies, different kind of paints, for, again, several years. Some 4 years ago, I joined RUPES, and since then I am the trainer in the headquarters here in Italy, in Vermezzo. Well, I'm not in Vermezzo, of course, at this moment. I'm at home, just like many of you. Probably many of you are also locked at home. I know it's a difficult moment for many of us, probably most of us, but we wanted just to let you have some useful information despite of what's happening outside. We all have some spare time, and we want just to be close to you and let you know that RUPES is working to start again, and in the meantime trying to do the best as we can to let you understand and know something new and learn something new. That was by me. We start on the geographically from the closer to me, which is Daniel from Strasbourg, the region of Strasbourg in France. Please, Daniel, can you tell us something?
So hi to everyone from my side as well. My name is Daniel Hurrle. I joined RUPES recently. So I'm also training manager for all German and French speaking countries. So my background is I was for many years a painter in some different car manufacturers, and the last 4 years I was working for a big polishing producer company. And yeah, now I'm part of the RUPES family and have the pleasure to be here with you today.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you. Then again, from the closer to me on a geographical scale, there is Todd, which is on the eastern coast of the US.
Yeah, ciao Fabrizio. My name is Todd Helme. I don't know what I refer to Dylan to tell me what my current job title is. I believe it's Senior Technical Specialist.
Technical Specialist, I believe.
Can I get a senior?
Sure, Senior Technical Specialist.
Senior Technical Specialist. I've been with RUPES for, I believe, 5 years, maybe 6. They all melt together, and was one of the first guys in the U.S. So I've been a part of the team since we kind of came out of a warehouse. And I've done sales through the U.S. and South America and Mexico, and currently do a lot of technical training and education development. And moving on.
Very good. Then since you are, I think Jason and Dylan are in the same place, so I will go on alphabetical order. No, not in the same house, but in the same region. Okay.
6 feet apart.
Yeah, 6 feet apart.
On alphabetical order, then will be Dylan before.
Okay, good. We're going with first names, not last names. Dylan von Kleist. So I run marketing and communications and all kinds of things here for the U.S. and North American market for RUPES. Also co-train a lot with Jason in the academy and appear at various events. So, I have an extensive background in detailing as a technician and in product development, but my specialty has always been in marketing. So honored to be here and share a screen with you guys. And I see we got a lot of people on. We're creeping up well over 150 now. So appreciate everybody logging on and enjoying spending a little time with us this morning.
Very good. Dylan with us, let's say we will have many questions, I hope, and I think. Most of you already submitted some during the registration, so we already have a bunch of questions. Dylan will go through all of them and will select. So he will propose us the most interesting, then there will be Todd, Jason, Daniel, and myself answering to them. But of course, Dylan, if wants to add something, he always have the possibility. So last but not least, Mr. Rose.
Yeah, Jason Rose with RUPES. I'm the Global Training Director for training programs, and I also run the Bigfoot Car Detailing Academy in Denver, Colorado. To echo what Dylan said, I'm very happy that you're here with us, and we obviously have some time on our hands, and it's a good time right now for people to hone in their skills and work on polishing technique and things like that. So we're very happy to present this content for you today.
Very good. So let's start. Dylan,
we received a lot of questions in advance, and during, as Fabrizio's mentioned, if you scroll to the bottom of your screen and click the Q&A box, you can submit questions during the session, and I will try and pick some good ones out of that, and I will also be answering some of them, just typing in answers for you in the background. But the first question actually is a good one I wanted to touch on, comparing the use of foam and wool pads. This particular question is, how do I get a better finish using the wool pads, and also compare maybe the wool and the microfiber pads?
Sure, this is, I think, an interesting question. It's all a matter of technique, so I would leave probably Todd to answer this question. So how can I change my technique? This is the question, right? How can I change my technique in order to make a cutting pad more on the finishing side, or the opposite? Am I correct? Is this?
Yeah, and I don't know if the question is, can wool finish better than foam? Because the way it's worded, how can I make wool finish better? Usually, foam is going to produce a better finish than wool. That's not 100% of the time, but it's really hard to get wool to leave a better finish than foam. But there are certain techniques you can use with any pad style to get a better finish. One of the biggest ones, in my opinion, is, and anybody can of course add to this, but you have to have a clean pad. When you're polishing paint, the residue, right? So when you polish paint, you're removing paint, and that paint goes into the pad, whether it's clear coat or single stage, and that paint changes the process. It causes the abrasives to stick together. It creates an uneven finish. So if you're using wool to finish, foam to finish, the most important thing, the biggest technique adjustment I ask my students to do is to clean the pad often. If it's with a random orbital, I like to use lower speed, 2 to 3, with firm pressure, not light pressure, but I want that pad against the surface evenly. But certainly if anybody else had a suggestion, and probably Jason would be a great person to speak to the difference between wool and microfiber in particular.
I have one question for Jason. Jason, do you think that the cycle length, so the duration of the cycle, can have an impact of on the quality of the finish that I get with that cycle?
Yeah, especially relative to wool and microfiber, there's definitely a cycle difference, and users should pay attention to this, especially for finishing, because the microfiber material, although it's a fiber just like wool, but it's a synthetic fiber versus a natural fiber on wool. But the cycle time is always, all other things being the same, microfiber will be more short cycle than a wool or a foam material. So we need to pay attention to that, because if we overcycle microfiber, then we can go backwards on our finish. So this is important to realize about microfiber.
So you suggest to have a slightly longer cycle when using foam, and instead reduce it when we go to fiber, especially if microfiber.
Yes, absolutely.
Very good.
I would absolutely agree with that statement.
Very good.
All right. Well, if we're ready for our next one, actually, we had somebody asking, and this is a question we get asked a fair amount in the 2-day training we do in the U.S. Bigfoot Academy, but in regards to the amount of material removed, whether it be sanding, polishing, whatever, he wants to know that he understands that UV protection exists in the clear coat. So, but at what level? Is it only at the very top? Is it completely through all the way? How much can we reduce the level of clear coat through any method of abrasion, sanding, polishing, before we need to be concerned about the integrity of the clear?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. I will answer according to my experience in the paint. Now, of course, UV destroy everything. With time, everything, especially pigments, especially colored things, get destroyed, because UV arrives with the energy that UV rays content, and they try to, they destroy, they actually break the molecules of the pigments. So something that was colored before will be broken by the by UV rays. Now, what happened is since some tens of years, like 20, 30 years, I would say all modern cars have a clear coat on top. This clear coat gave to the chemists the possibility to insert something that protects what is below from the action of UV rays. So these, which are called UV filters, they have several names. They are very expensive materials that act like suicidal protectant. So they protect from the UV, but in the meantime, they got destroyed. Instead of the pigment, they sacrifice. So this means that after years, a clear coat will not have any more kind of protection, any kind of protection to the color which is below. Where is this protectant? In all the thickness of the clear coat, there are these protectants. How many? It depends. Especially depends on the price and on the quality of the clear coat. That's why we have different price levels for different brands for clear coats. Usually this is one of the big differences, the amount of UV protectants, UV filters that we have inside the formulation. The more we have, the more lasting it will be. How much can I reduce? The more I reduce, of course, I will reduce also the protection. But what is even more important is to keep our car always protected. We did a webinar recently about waxes, about coatings, about all-in-one, all stuff that protects the paint. These kind of materials, they usually contain also some parts, not a lot, but some % of these UV filters. So they will restore, as long as the car is protected, and we know that it can last weeks, months, years, depending. But as long as the car is protected with these protectants, we will restore also the protection to the color which is below. So this is how it works. Of course, every time I polish a car, I will take out some part of clear coat, but probably in that part, which is the most superficial, the UV filters have already been destroyed by by UV rays. So I will not impact that much on the protection of the color which is below the clear coat. That's what I had to say. I don't know, Daniel, do you want to add something to this?
No, I think you mentioned the most important points, and I completely agree with you. Maybe just want to add about the question, how much of that clear coat can I remove during polishing or even sanding? So we always talk to our customers or end users, or we all the time say try to remove as less as possible, because the modern cars, they have 30 to 40 micron clear coat. So that's more or less the same like a human hair. So it's simply like nothing. We cannot imagine that, but it's simply like nothing. So every time when you're polishing, even if you're just doing some finishing job, you are removing a small part of the clear coat. So I recommend always try, or most of the time, maybe it's better to let some scratches or stay on the surface as trying to remove everything. Because one day you will not have any clear coat on the surface, and then you will have a much more bigger problem. Because then you will have a lot of cost for this car. You need to repaint the part, and yeah. So that's for me one important point that I just want to add to you, Fabrizio.
Yeah. Well done, Daniel. Thank you, Jason. You had to add something.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that one of the most important trends in paint thickness going on right now is that car factories are kicking out cars with thinner and thinner paint every new model year. We're actually observing paint get thinner and thinner. So this paint thickness is very, very important for detailers to monitor because, as Daniel said, the least aggressive method is always best. And it's no longer the main goal, which has been the goal for many years for detailers, to try and get scratches out very aggressively, very fast. That can no longer be the goal. The new goal should be how can we remove defects and leave the most amount of paint on the car possible. So this is a new objective because of paint, getting thinner. We need to be mindful of this.
Jason, one common question that I receive, and all of you probably the same, is how much paint, clear coat or solid color paint, do I remove with, for example, I don't know, wool pad or foam pad? And once, Jason, you told me why this is really difficult to reckon, to say.
Yeah. Well, there's lots of variables that will impact how much paint we're removing during a paint correction procedure. So the aggressiveness of our pad, the type of compound, the technique, the type of tool, paint hardness, all those things will impact how much paint we're removing. So if the question is how much paint are we removing in a average paint correction procedure, there is no exact answer for that. It is a total variable. But we can say with experience that with multi-step procedures, we're probably removing about 25% of a mil. Now, in the United States, we measure in mils, and I know in Europe it's in microns.
25% of a mil is about 10
microns.
8 microns.
Yeah. So generally speaking, we're not removing a lot of paint, but as Daniel said, with aggressive procedures and multiple times hitting that same car, you could actually remove more than a mil of paint over time. It used to be the case that car factories were building into the paint thickness about 0.5 mil of a repair zone, like a future repair zone, but that is no longer the case. So, it's hard to answer how much paint we're removing, but we're in our classes. Sometimes we encourage people to try and burn through the paint just to see what it took, to actually do it. But as you can imagine, If you're trying to do it, it's not that easy, but when you're not trying to make it happens very easy.
In a follow-up to this question, because we're getting some other questions about this specific topic, so we're on this already, but our friend Hans wants to know then, when he's doing a paint correction, Jason, I think this would kind of fall to what we refer to as the go, no-go decision. At what level, if you do have the instrumentation to measure paint thickness, where's the point where you don't do any abrasive methods and you just apply protection? Where would your recommendation be?
Yeah, so if you're using paint thickness gauges, which, as I mentioned, the paint thickness is getting thinner and thinner, so it's more important for detailers to use devices to measure paint thickness. But if you're measuring what I believe is 70 or 80 microns, it should be about 3 mils or less. If you're measuring that on your device, then 3 mils or less, that is the no-go decision. Because if you continue to hammer on that paint, then you're very likely going to burn through somewhere.
So just for non-Americans, 3 mils, which is the go, no-go limit, is about 75 microns.
Yeah.
Usually, most modern cars, they don't have much more than that, honestly.
We're measuring like 4 mils.
About 100 microns, yeah.
It's also important to look at the car. For example, I had, in the States, it was a little bit popular. Dylan might disagree, but it was a Mazda Speed 3. And it had a red metallic. It's a Mazda, and it had a tri-coat. So it was base coat. Then they put in a real thick pearl coat with a lot of flake, and then clear on top. And so I really loved this paint color, and I was going to sand it and polish it. And it was a Garage Queen. It was my fun car. And I measured the paint thickness, and it was 3.3, 3.4 mils, which is telling me on most paint systems, you have a base coat and a clear coat, right? So in the clear coat is usually 75% or more thick than the base coat. The base coat's very thin. Well, in this case, I have a base coat, a pearl coat, which is adding the flake and the pearl, right? And then the clear coat. So if all 3 of those combined is only 3.3 mils, as soon as I measured it, my heart sunk, because I have some knowledge of how the car was painted with the tri-coat. It was impossible. And the thing to remember is also this. Could I have polished out some of the scratches? Yes, probably. But if that area got scratched again, then it's beyond repair. And so you always have to kind of aim, and if you're a professional detailer, always err on the side of caution. Your job is to be a custodian for your customer's vehicle. So you need to make the decision to protect and preserve their paint system. Unless you're doing a show car and you have knowledge of that paint.
Yeah, also one important point that I'd add always is, we as detailer, we are really crazy guys. I think we always want to do it as best as possible, as much shiny as possible. But what happened when the customer come back and take his car? He's looking, whoa, it's shiny, whoa, surface is smooth, and that's it. He go in the car and go away. And one day after that, the car, maybe it's scratched again or completely dirty. So for sure, we want to have the best result, but we need to think about it if it's really necessary to do it, or if it's more necessary that the customer comes back more often. So,
Yeah, here in the U.S., we call that the detailer's eye, and you can see things that your customers cannot. And you are probably more picky about the result than your customer is in a lot of cases. Moving us forward on to one of the questions that was submitted before the webinar started was somebody, since we're on the topic of paints, somebody asked, is there a different way to approach a refinished or repainted vehicle versus a factory finish? Or, what are the differences that they should be looking for in their process when they address a refinished or a factory finished vehicle?
Yeah. Okay, I would say we start again with Todd, because he was the first to answer to the first question.
Sure. I think it's important just to throw this out there, that most of your brand new cars, and again, I can only speak in the US, but I'm assuming this is globally, have been repainted. And at least in the US, there's a process that's used where the car dealership is actually kept out of the loop of the repair. So the car is damaged in transit, goes to a certified body shop, is resprayed to the best of their factory ability in terms of color and texture, and then goes to the dealership. And I forget the numbers, and I think maybe I was talking to Jason or Dylan, so if I'm throwing out a number that's incorrect, please correct me. But I think it's almost 30% of all new cars in the U.S. have some area that's been spot repaired.
It was over 20%, probably mid to upper 20% range.
Right.
And yeah, you're speaking specifically to what we refer to in the States, for anybody who doesn't know, is the vehicle processing center, where all of the cars come from import and they're inspected. And when they're being unloaded or while they were on the train, they may have had some damage. The repairs there are done, to Todd's point, to factory spec, but they are not recorded or reported. So not even the dealership knows if a panel has been repainted when they take delivery of the vehicle and then sell it to the owner. So it's possible that for every 100 people watching right now, 20 of you have a car that you may think is factory new, but has one or more repainted panels somewhere on it.
And to continue on that thought, so imagine that 30% of the new cars, and this in the U.S. is domestic cars. Imported cars coming over in a Carrier, the number is obviously higher. And then add to the fact that probably your mirrors and your bumpers have been painted by a third-party supplier. Those are usually not painted at the factory, and it is a different paint. The softer that bumper, the more flex agent, or they use a paint that's more malleable, because in the U.S. you have to be able to achieve, I think it's a 5-mile-an-hour bump impact without damage, right? So that paint has to flex. So you're dealing with multiple paint areas. If you have a Corvette with a carbon fiber roof or a hood, for example, that's third party. So putting that all together, it's very hard to say what are the differences between OEM and aftermarket paints, because most OEM cars have different paint systems throughout. And there are some specific differences. One is that on a factory car, your car is baked at a very high temperature. Most cars, not all of them, but most cars are baked at 350 degrees Fahrenheit, 350 to 400 Fahrenheit. So when they cool off, they're cured, because that body panel gets hot and it pushes the solvent from the inside out. So it's an even cure. And when you polish factory paint, it's very consistent. The more you polish, it stays the same. It doesn't change. It's not a moving target. When you deal with aftermarket paint, body shop paint, most of the time they do a very low bake, so it cures from the outside in, and this can actually change the consistency of the paint. The further you go in, the softer it is, the funnier it reacts. It tends to swell more with heat, right? Whenever you apply friction and therefore get heat, so anytime you polish, you actually expand the paint. And aftermarket paint tends to be more elastic, and the more you file it down, the more elastic it becomes. So it's a moving target. But at the end of the day, the best diagnostic tool is a test spot, right? Anything you polish, always do one spot first, and then dial in your process to that specific paint. I wouldn't get too caught up in the type of paint. I would be focused more on the solution. But I don't know if that was a little bit too long-winded, or if I missed anything that you guys.
No, that's perfect. Perfect
That's
answer.
perfect.
I think, test spot is a paramount important parameter and procedure. So, Jason, can you tell us a little bit more about how to do a test spot? What's the best way to make it? And what kind of information can I get from this test spot?
Yeah, so the importance of test spot, to add on to what Todd said, is super important, because of the reason that we just don't know specifically how the paint's going to respond, even panel by panel. So a test spot is really, really important. And the way we do this is we take a combination of a compound and a pad and a tool, and we do a full application, a full polishing cycle on one spot of the car, maybe multiple spots on the car. But the area will be no wider than your shoulders, but certainly about 6 times the pad diameter of whatever pad you're using. And you just try a spot. Now, when you do this application, one of 3 things is going to happen. So one possibility is exactly what you hope, which is you're going to remove defects, you're going to shine up the paint, you're not leaving a pad mark. It is the absolute desired best result. So that's one possibility of a result for the test bot. And if you get that result, then feel free to use that combo on the rest of the car, because it's probably a good combo for that car. The second possibility for test bot is you remove all the defects very quickly, but you leave kind of a haze or a pad mark. And this means that the combination that you did in the test bot is very likely too aggressive, and you need to back off on aggressiveness, either the pad or the liquid. The third possibility as a result for test bot is you don't remove all the target defects, and the defect removal is slow. So you remove maybe half of the defects that you wanted to get out. Now in this case, it's an indication that you're probably on medium to hard paint, and you need to step up your aggressiveness either in pad or liquid. So those are the three outcomes of a test bot, and you need to listen to the paint. The paint's going to tell you what it likes and doesn't like, and then you make adjustments.
Yeah, if I can add something, I think that paint is one of the most underestimated component of a polishing process. The importance of the paint is really, really top. What I mean is we always have questions, and we always receive letters, emails saying, oh, which tool should I use, which pad, which compound, which lighting, what is the best degreaser or panel wiper, and so on and so forth. And many people usually neglect the importance of and the impact that a different paint has on a polishing. So many times when we try maybe a new compound coming from a producer, I don't care who it is. I mean, it can be a RUPES, it can be a competitor of ours, it doesn't matter. We just use it on one panel, we try it on a panel, and then, oh no, I don't like it. Probably it's not the product that is not good, or the polisher or the pad, it's probably the paint that is not the right paint for that combination of compound, pad, and polisher. Probably I should use it on a different paint. It's something as a product developer, we know very well. Many times we try it on a paint. It happens to me, for example, when I work with Jason and I test a new product, and then I say, listen, I got this feedback from this product. And then he says, okay, did you try it on a different panel, or which was the product? It also happened to me when Daniel was here in Italy, and we tried a couple of new products from us, comparing it to the competitors. And on a fresh paint, we had our product working good and the competitor's product working very bad. Then we tried on a hard paint, and it was really the opposite. Mm-hmm. So many times we need to understand what is the nature of the product that we are using, but most of it, what is the nature of the paint?
Hey, I would add, Fabrizio, that in order to make a valid conclusion about a product's performance, I would recommend that you do it on at least 10 cars. I mean, 10 cars to factor in the variable of paint before you can make a conclusion about the product. It's important. I agree with you.
Yeah, what I normally teach is all products, assuming that there are only serious producers. So let's consider the 10 top companies. All products are good. If we don't like it, it's because either we, as personal preferences, we don't like that kind of product, or because the paint is not the correct one. So the product probably performs very well on a different substrate and not on that one. But I believe that there are no primary companies that are selling rubbish. All sell good stuff.
Lots of good products right now.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Well, on that topic then, let's actually dive into this a little bit. So Alex posed the question, is it really possible to accelerate the paint correction cycle to just one step? And how could it be possible? So this is a subject that I think many of us have encountered in trainings. We talk about one-step correction many times, and there's a lot of people who do not believe that this is ever possible. It requires 2, 3, or more steps. So let's talk about that in theory, and then is it possible, and then how would that be possible?
I'd like to hear Daniel on this. As I told you in the beginning, as he told you in the beginning, he has joined RUPES recently, and so his experience with the Bigfoot system is relatively recent and short. So I'd like to have his opinion on that, and then we can also discuss with Jason and Todd.
Yeah, so my opinion about the one-step polish, so I would say one step is a big word, so I would say it depends. It really depends on the car, it depends on the defects, it depends on the color, and it depends on what are you expecting from the end result. So one-step polishing process, for sure, it's possible, we can do it. We can do it in different ways, but probably it will not work in every kind of situation. In some kind of situation, it's sometimes better to work in 2 or even in 3 steps. That could happen also. Then I would say for one guy, the gloss and the finish is enough with a one-step system. The other guy says, no, I want much more gloss. I want a much better finish. So yeah, there are really a lot of different points who come in with this question about the one-step polishing process. So we as RUPES, we have one-step process solution, but we also have the tools and the pads and the products to have a 2 or even a 3-step polishing system.
Thank you, Daniel. So Todd, Jason, do you want to add something?
If I may, Jason, may I? Yeah,
Todd, please.
Please, thank you. If you would have asked me this question 10 years ago, my answer would have been no. And the reason is because whenever you do paint correction, you're taking one scratch and replacing it with another scratch, right? Every time you polish paint, you put a scratch into the paint. The idea is to make that scratch so small and so uniform that you can't see it. The problem is 10 years ago, the most common tool, and still the most common tool, but the scale was this way, was the rotary. And the problem with the rotary is it places that scratch in a repeating pattern. So you see the scratch. So anytime you would do real paint correction with a rotary, it was always 2 steps, usually 3, because now you had to refine that scratch, and then with a rotary you have to refine it even more because it's so visible. So one of the biggest impacts that RUPES had with the large diameter orbital, the random orbital, is now we're taking that finishing scratch and making it random. And so it's less visible. So with a large orbit and the correct combination of pad and compound, we suddenly had the ability to remove medium to fine scratches and leave a perfect finish in one step. So yeah, it is absolutely possible. And a lot of that is the advancement in tool technology, the ability to move that pad really fast but still be in orbit, or still have an orbital pattern, and the components to have a pad that transfers that movement, and to have a compound that works with that movement with the changes in heat and friction. So is it possible? Even today with a rotary, it's almost impossible, because no matter how good the system becomes, you're still dealing with that movement and that scratch pattern. But with a random orbital, it's actually surprisingly more possible than I think people give it credit for. And we do a lot of classes where we teach people, hey, when you're done, you're done. And so remove the defect. And the more aggressive you go, staying with random orbital, if it's too aggressive, you need that secondary step to refine the scratch and increase the gloss. But by eliminating the cause of swirl marks, you move that possibility closer. So that would be my...
Yeah, very good points, Todd. And I would add on also to what Dylan said. And my response to this question would be, it is more possible to do one-step correction than most detailers realize. It's mostly a mental block. And we experience this in our academy when we have students come in and do our class. And it's more mentally acceptable that we need to do a second step or maybe a third step. So what I observe in the hands-on portions of our class is lots of detailers quickly mentally go to, oh, I need a second step. And we would challenge them, hey, wait a minute. do you really need a second step, and can you dial in the compound and the pad to do it in one step? And in most cases we can. So my answer would be it's a lot more possible today than it has ever been. To Todd's point, the technology has gotten to a point where one-step paint correction is more possible today than it has ever been. And then it's also more possible than most people realize.
Just one more thing that I would like to say. My American colleagues always make joke of me because I always do like this. So there should be one gesture that you all understand, and it's this one. Do you know this?
No.
No? Money.
Oh, yes, money.
Our money. This is a very important parameter. So how many steps? Many times we don't consider how much money am I getting from this job. That's also important. Yeah, okay. How is the final result after the first step? But am I going to be paid for a second step? That's also something that we always should consider and take into account.
Very important.
I think the first question that was asked today was how to get a better finish from wool pads. If my memory only goes back 30 minutes, so I'm a little bit past my time frame. But and I had mentioned a clean pad is so important, and probably I think all of us, whenever I teach a class or any of us do, I always instruct to keep the pad absolutely clean. To me, it's the most important mistake that people make, right? So we're talking about a one step. Well, one of the limiting factors when you're using a compound with a coarser pad is you're getting a lot more paint residue building in that pad because you're doing more correction. And oftentimes we'll stop and clean the pad, maybe with compressed air, and go back over that area with the existing residue, and suddenly the finish quality improves dramatically. So we're showing in one step that even when you're being aggressive, you're making an aggressive movement, aggressive compound, that paint residue is what's pulling the finished quality backwards. So if you're trying to do something in one step, keep the pad clean. Switch to a fresh pad when you need to. Oftentimes, if you slow down just a little bit, you'll end up going much faster, much further. So in terms of a one step, I think it's really important to have fresh and clean pads.
Good stuff, guys. If I can move us to the next one, we've had quite a few questions submitted before and now during regarding rotary versus random orbital. And I can speak, I think, on behalf of our American half. I don't know how the Europeans would view this, but there seems to be a renaissance in rotary polishing in the U.S. It's become somewhat popular again, where it was kind of forgotten in many applications here. But the question specifically that somebody asked is that a lot of the larger rotary tools that they have RPM speeds up to 3,000, whereas the RUPES is obviously significantly less at 1,700 RPM. So is there a reason, a thought process, or a benefit to this lower speed setting when rotary polishing? Let's talk about speeds on rotary.
Okay, so I would divide this question in two, and I would like the first part, so rotary or dual action, to listen to Daniel, because he arrived with us only recently, and he was really a rotary guy when I met him first. So he was in love with rotary, and he said, yeah, dual action, okay, but... And so I would like to ask him his experience, and then Jason or Todd, you will tell us about the speed of the rotary tool and why we have such a lower speed. What is the technical reason for this decision of ours to make a lower speed buffer? Daniel, please.
So yeah, as Fabrizio told you, I still really love to polish with rotary, but I really learn a lot also about random orbital. That at today's time, it really doesn't matter if you're polishing with rotary or random orbital. From the speed side, you will be as fast as the orbital as with the rotary. But for me, there are some different cases where I'm still using rotary, like on very high solid clear coats well, a lot of damage. For me, with the rotary, it's always better for the first step because you are faster, you can cut better as with the orbital one. But on the opposite, on the medium solid or soft to fresh paints, I now start to use only random orbital because it's much more easier. You are as fast as with the rotary one. And the best point is you have a much more better finish and easier finish as with the rotary one. So yeah, that's my point.
Okay, if I just can add, from a technical perspective, there are really few things that you can do with one polisher and you cannot do with another one. Okay, most of the time it's a matter of personal preferences, it's a matter of habit, it's a matter of technique. But there's not one method which is better than the other. There are people that prefer one over the other, but not something that I can. Well, there is something, but very few things that I can do with a buffer and not with a DA or vice versa. Jason, do you agree?
Yeah, one point I would add to what you're saying, Fabrizio, if you're comparing rotary with large orbit, dual action polishing, one technical difference is in the area of precision. So when it comes to the rate of paint removal, like how fast we're removing paint, it's actually more challenging to be more precise with the rotary in that case. If you really wanted to be very precise and exact and metered about how much paint you're removing, it's much more challenging to try and do that with a rotary. But with a dual action, you can actually meter paint removal more precisely. So that would be one technical difference I would put in there. And I also agree that it's a matter of preference. I think there's a big misconception on the market that large orbit polishers don't remove defects as fast as rotary. I don't believe that's the case. I think you can remove defects very effectively with both of those tools, but it does come down to preference, I think.
I'll jump on that, Jason, and then I'll attempt to answer the question about speed. The random orbital is the safest tool, so it kind of gets this reputation in some circles as a beginner's tool, but it's probably the opposite. In fact, if you scour the internet and look at technical articles written by some really, really knowledgeable and creative people, you can find articles on random orbital polishing that go off the deep end because the owner or the user has a direct impact on the pattern that the tool makes. So with a rotary, you hit it and it spins. With a gear driven, you hit it and it does this every time. It's a star. With a random orbital, you can get this, you can get this. I mean, it's actually a very complicated tool, and that's why some people who've invested the time to learn it swear by it. And they will argue, and you'll see the arguments on Facebook, well, gear-driven is more powerful than a random orbital, more powerful. And these people will argue, but they don't realize maybe what's better for somebody else because of their technical skill is different than somebody else. Mm-hmm. But I have found those who have taken the time to really learn the random orbital, not just use it as a process, but really dig into it, tend to be the more technical polishers. That's just an observation. As far as rotary speed, one of the things with a rotary or any polishing system is one of the ways we can measure potential is by speed, right? Because speed can be friction. The faster I rub something across the surface, the more potential friction I have. And there's a lot of variables that go into that. But a rotary, because of its nature, you have a disc that's spinning, it develops a lot of speed on the edge. A small pad, a 180 millimeter pad, at 1200 RPM is about 35 miles an hour. In kilometers an hour, I'm going to say it's about 52 kilometers an hour. My math could be a little bit wrong, but I think it's close. Right? Similar, 52, 53. That's a lot of velocity. And so the potential to damage the paint is much faster. And remember, with a rotary, and this is only at 1200 RPM, a random orbital, 21 millimeter random orbital never goes above 15 miles an hour, 16. But the whole pad is doing it. Whereas with a rotary, it's just on the edge. the center of that pad is doing very little work. So why is that important? Because if we were to go to 3,000 RPM with a 180 millimeter pad, the velocity mathematically would be 140 kilometers an hour. I'm doing that in my head based on the 1,200 RPM, but it's close. And the problem there
for this early in the morning, Todd.
Well, I do have my Diet Dr. Pepper, so that is that's my brain fizz. But that gets the pad moving, and you're putting so much heat and friction into the paint. In the old days, when the rotary polishers were really angled, they were angle grinders that people put a rotary pad on, and you were polishing. I know in the UK they call all paint lacquer, but in the United States we only call nitrocellulose paint lacquer. You could get it really hot and maybe even move it. But with modern paint, heat is a unwanted thing. So to inflict 3,000 RPM worth of heat into modern paint just doesn't make sense. If your polisher was originally designed to be an angle grinder, well, that's probably why the speed is so high. But the RUPES polisher was designed, the Bigfoot rotary was designed to be a rotary. It's designed for automotive use only. So there is no need on modern paint to go that high, especially when your sweet spot's between 1,000 and 1,500 RPM.
Very good. Thank you, Todd. Just, I'm spoiling now. Todd correctly mentioned in temperature during the polishing job, and stay connected because Jason and I will, in the next future, will propose you a webinar, especially on how to manage heat while polishing, when it's good to have, when it's not good to have, and so on and so forth. So it will be probably June. Well, most of our plans got messed up by the virus, but we were working on it, and we will try to keep it working.
Can I add one more thing? I'm sorry, I'm being long-winded. If your rotary polishing process requires 3,000 RPM worth of friction, then probably you want to make a more aggressive previous step. Like if I needed something that had that much damage that I had to use 3,000, I would consider sanding the paint first with a finer grit, because there is no need to inflict that level of friction through polishing onto the paint. Yeah. But there's better methods to get there first. So either your sanding technique is bad or you need to sand first.
Yeah, that's a very good suggestion. And when I think of the difference in normal or standard RPMs being used with rotaries, two things come to mind. One is I think of the differences between Europe and North America and South America. If you look at norms on rotary RPM use, the RPMs are much higher in the Americas, North and South. And the Europeans, generally, relatively speaking, polish with RPMs much lower. So it's kind of a European approach. I personally am a low RPM rotary user, but I learned that from the Europeans. Didn't learn it from an American, because Americans, if a little bit is good, then more is better. So it tends to be a European approach to rotary, and because RUPES is a European company, our rotary is a lower RPM. So there's that thought. The other thought that comes to mind about this difference in RPMs, the tool, the compound, and the pad technologies have advanced to the point where we have technology available to us now where we aren't as dependent on that RPM speed. I would argue that we never really needed that high RPMs all along. However, the products, the compounds and pads we're using now and the tools, it lends itself very well to low RPM rotary. So I just think we can do it now, and why not do it now?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, if we can keep on the subject of machines, we have quite a few people who have asked a question. I think this is a very common one that we can address pretty easily among us, is the choice between, if you're talking DA now, dual action random orbital, 15 versus 21. why choose one over the other, or is there an advantage for one versus the other? And I will mention this, we actually have a webinar that answers this in some depth that Fabrizio and Jason did a while ago. So you can go to YouTube and look for that webinar on the RUPES SPA YouTube channel. But we can discuss it quickly here, Fabrizio. Do you think you can address 15 versus 21?
It is a very old classic. No matter who I'm talking about, I'm talking to in a class, it can be a distributor, it can be a class of body shops, it can be a class of detailers. Sooner or later, someone will ask better 15 or 21. Again, I can probably spoil right away, there's no better. Because if there was one better than the other, we wouldn't sell it. So, of course, if we have two, it's because each of them has a reason to exist. Mm-hmm. The second thing we have to consider is it depends a lot on the area. We have areas within Italy, within Europe, or worldwide, even close to each other, where we only sell 21 or only sell 15. Why? Because we have different markets, we have different salesmen, we have different distributors. So many times they push one because they like more one and less the other. But let's hear from my colleagues. Daniel, which one do you prefer? 15, 21?
So for me, I prefer the 15 millimeters because, yeah, it's from the handling side, I prefer it, and it's easier to reach different corners or edges on the car as a 21. But definitely the 21 will cut much more faster as the 15 millimeters. And especially if you're working on some plain surface, or if you're working on some big surface like a boat or aircraft or something like that, I think in that case the 21 will be the much more better choice as the 15 millimeter.
I can tell you what, I don't know if the other people agree, but I think Daniel loves the 15 more than the 21 because he likes to polish. I don't. I polish my job. I'm a trainer. I love to train. I don't love to actually polish. I'm joking, of course, but I prefer 21, for example, because it's faster. It does the job in shorter time. So that's a good thing for me, because I want the job to be done in shorter possible time. Jason, what do you think about this?
Well, actually, as a trainer, I have a view on this question as a trainer, but I also have an opinion personally when I'm polishing my own cars, and I do enjoy polishing in addition to training. So my personal preference is the 15 millimeter. However, I do use both. So I will use a 21 or a 15 depending on what I'm doing. So if it's a very large vehicle with lots of flat surfaces, then I will use the 21. If it's a vehicle that has lots of curves and contours, then I'm going to use the 15 millimeter. As a trainer, my demonstrations and all my training, I'm always picking up the 15 millimeter first. It just is easier to handle, more comfortable, less pad drag, smaller pad diameter. But that's my view on it. Todd, what's your position on this?
What day is it today? I change back and forth. But if I had to pick, for a long time I would have told you the 15, but I think for me personally, I prefer the 21. But the reality is, if I could only have one of the two, I would choose the 15. Because it's more adaptable to more areas on more cars, right? Now, if I had a big truck, well, I do have a truck, but it's an F-150, so it's not that big. It's not like yours, Jason. Or even Dylan's is a little bit more manly, but that's a different story. The Europeans are like, what the hell is a truck, right? But in all seriousness, I prefer the 15 for comfort and versatility, but if I only have, if I'm using it, I like the 21. I think it just cuts faster and it's a little tougher, but the 15 is way more versatile. Dylan, what's your preference?
I'd echo a lot of what you said. I prefer, if you made me choose only one to ever use again, I would most likely choose a 15. and an LHR 75 pneumatic to go with it. But but the 15 LHR 15 is my preferred tool. But given an option, if I have a cart with many tools on it and I can choose, it really, for me, depends more on what area even of a vehicle I'm working on. If I'm on a large flat hood on it, I prefer the 21. It's much easier. You're on that's this plane here. It's large, it's flat. But then when I get to door panels and fenders and things like that, then the 15 is more comfortable. So I mean, my opinion changes almost panel to panel, vehicle to vehicle. But yeah, if I had to choose, if you made me only take one with me and I had to go polish cars on an island or in the middle of the desert or something and I could only take one, it would be my 15. So,
but you know, you did say the LHR 75, the mini air, which honestly, sometimes I think that'd be the only tool I'd take because the thing weighs like 1 pound and the
It's
correction.
a monster.
Yeah, that's like I think we did a poll once, right, with RUPES USA, and hands down the favorite tool of everybody at RUPES USA is the Air Mini, for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
That's
I think I would polish my whole car with that just to do it.
Anyway, we might say to all the people that are listening that you must have all of them. You must have 21, 15, 25.
at least two of each.
Yeah, I'm not even allowed to open my garage anymore.
The 75, the Nano, and the Rotary, and the Mille.
Yeah. So the answer is yes. You need them all.
Yes, all of them. Changing gears a little bit back away from tools, we have some other questions, and this is actually one that is interesting. I can actually credit Jason with educating me more on this specific topic, I would say. Something I maybe hadn't paid as much attention to in the past is the cycle time of compounds. And I'd start by saying this is something that I think was really highlighted when RUPES unveiled the Melee and the Rotary systems, because obviously we need additional lubrication and longer cycles for these more aggressive tool movements. But even within a category of compounds for a specific tool movement, you have both long and short. So the questions are kind of in two categories. So if we can answer both of these. People want to know, how do you know if you have a long or a short cycle compound? So, because it's not often published on the bottle, it's not on the instructions, there's nothing that tells you. And then is there an option that is better, long or short?
I would say we start with Daniel, because he has worked in a company that was manufacturing polish compounds, and he still does, because as you know, as most of you probably already know, we have started a year and a half ago, roughly, to produce internally our own compounds and polish, and new to come very soon, again produced in-house. So he still works in a producer, but then we will also listen to Jason on what he taught to Dylan. We want to know it as well.
Yeah, so I would say in each of our compounds we have two big groups of circle time. We have the first one who is the correction part, and the second one who is the finishing part. So I always taught to during my trainings, try to polish the polish completely out. That means normally when you start the polish looks like a little bit milky, a little bit white on the surface, and as long as you polish it will start to look more and more invisible on the surface. So when you see that the polish or the compound is completely invisible or just see some thin layer on the surface, there you can be sure, okay, all my powders inside, they're completely broke down, and I have reached the highest gloss and the best finish of this product. So I always recommend if you want to have the best finish, work a little bit longer time, as always adding new product. So try to take the surface more or less completely invisible, or just have a light oil residue on the surface before you wipe off the rest of residues, and then you can be sure you have the best results with each of our products.
Thank you, Daniel. Jason, did you want to add something? Yeah, I guess so.
Oh yeah, I actually have a lot to say about this topic, but I'll try and be concise. But the first thing I say, and I learned in college from my professors, that you should never start speaking with an apology. But I'm going to make an apology first. On behalf of all the manufacturers of compounds in our industry, we as a group do not do a good job about communicating cycle time on the label or published with a product. But it's super important because the chemist of each of these products on the market has a full intention of the polishing cycle, and they know it, and it can be tuned. It's like dials on a radio. It can be tuned by product. And what I mean by that is a product could be long cycle, a product could be short cycle. How do you know? Well, in the absence of the company telling you what the intention is with that formula, there are ways that any user can figure this out for yourself. So you do what we call standard application. It's about 60 seconds of application time. And if you find at the end of 60 seconds that your product has completely dried out on the paint, and maybe even you've created some dust at the end of that polishing cycle, or it got lots of pad drag where you're starting to fight the pad towards the end of that 60 seconds. Now, if you have that experience, then you are very likely using a product that is intentionally short cycle. And that means that about 60 seconds of application time or 6 passes, that is the maximum that product should be used in an application. Now, if you find at the end of 60 seconds that it's still very wet and very lubricated, lots of polishing residue on the surface, there's a good likelihood that product is a long cycle product, and you could actually extend more passes or more seconds. Our philosophy here at RUPES is we want to dial in all of our products for a 60-second or a 6-pass application, but we do have products within our product offering that are short cycle and some that are long. And the last thing I'll say about this is that it's a definite user preference. It also is impacted by your environment. So if you are in a hot, dry climate, then short cycle products will dry up a lot faster. So you might want to prefer longer cycle products. But it is a definite user preference. Personally, I'm a short cycle guy, but there are many, many users that prefer longer cycle.
I totally agree with you. I'm also a short cycle. I prefer it, but I see people working for minutes and minutes and minutes, and you wonder, okay, sooner or later he will stop. Many times. Yeah, well, on a formula perspective, we would all like to have a very good long cycle, easy to wipe off, that cuts a lot, and so on and so forth. Many times, if I want a longer cycle, then I have to insert in my formula more lubricants. And of course, lubricants will prevent the abrasive to cut because they lubricate the system. So formulators always need to find a balance between cutting, so leave the abrasive cut and reduce the amount of lubricants, but this will shorten the cycle down and also create lots of dust, and expanding the cycle duration, but in this way losing part of the abrasion. So that's the reason why there are different compounds. Yes, there are personal preferences, but there are also technical needs for the people who create the formula to try to balance all these variables that are linked one with each other. And at the end of the day, if we have one product, it's because we have tried to find the perfect combination of all these variables.
Hey, one thing to add, Fabrizio, within our product offering, the compounds that RUPES offers right now, if you're a user of our Zephyr course compound, then that is a short cycle product. If you're a user of our Miele course compound, which is blue colored cap as well, that is considered a long cycle, just so you know what you have. And then the Rotary course compound is a medium cycle, so it's somewhere in between. within our product offering, that's what you'll get.
Good. Shall we move to the next question, Dylan?
Yeah, let's see. So we have so many good questions, and we're coming up on just about an hour, so we'll get through some more. And then for any of you who did not get your questions answered, I'm answering some of them on the back end, but certainly you can contact RUPES through any number of ways, and we can get you an answer to these questions if they're not addressed here.
Sorry,
so
if you all agree, and we have, because I would say a couple of 20 minutes more, and then we finish, because it will be an hour and a half in total. I would say let's try to give a simple question, short, if we have more questions, so we can answer to like 10 more, if we have 10 more.
Okay, going through some fast ones. So this one can be long, but I think we can answer this fairly concisely. If dealing with a severely defected surface, so something with many defects, would sanding with 2000 or 3000 grit be better than using a coarse compound, aggressive pad, and aggressive tool? So sanding versus polishing.
Yes.
Maybe.
Good. Next one.
Next question.
Well, I'll say a few words on this one, because this is one of my favorite subjects, in that we already talked about how negative heat can be, and mostly is, to the polishing process. If you're already going to have to take an aggressive approach, and Todd touched on this earlier, maybe your previous approach should have been slightly more aggressive. And we cannot eliminate heat completely from the polishing process because it is friction-based. There's always going to be the byproduct of heat to some degree or another. But in sanding, especially if we've done it with a little bit of water, we can work very, I would say, cold. So we can address those defects, install a consistent and easy to remove defect, and then your polishing stages are easier. So,
Two super duper super fast. I would say maybe, but probably yes, because some paints look really bad. So still do a test spot, and it might clean up. You never know, right? So it doesn't hurt to try. But if we're working on paint that's really, really, really bad, another advantage of sanding is that you can visually gauge the removal of the defect. If I sand over the area twice and I wipe off the water, let's say I'm wet sanding, the surface is going to look dull, but the scratch is going to look shiny because I haven't sanded the scratch yet. So that allows me to precisely remove the right amount of paint without kind of guessing. And when you polish, there's a little bit of a guess game because you're polishing through a slurry and then wiping it off. So probably sanding is the best choice.
Good.
Perfect.
Agree.
All right. Another question, and this is a simple yes, no. I say to Fabrizio, you just ask everybody. Is there one tool and combination of products that I could use on every car for a perfect result?
One tool?
There's one brand.
One tool and one combination of products for every car.
Tool, one pad, one... there's one thing that is always funny to me. I heard a lot because Jason and I have done many training together. And there's one thing that is always making laugh to me. And there's only one technique which is not correct. And it's using the same technique and the same pad and the same compound and the same tool, no matter what the car, no matter what the paint, and so on. So the answer for me is definitely not.
Yeah, I would echo that. Definitely no. It's always changing. Every car is different. Every defect is different. The environment is different. You have to have some variety of things to get perfect on every car.
I could say, unfortunately, but I should say luckily, because if it was so simple, then Jason and I and Todd and Daniel and Dylan and many other people would be unemployed. We would just
be no point for this webinar at all. We'd have no reason to have this webinar.
The training would be very simple. It's use this tool, this pad, that compound, done.
Yeah. Okay, moving to another one. Let's see. What would be, so this builds on our 15 versus 21 conversation. Is there a tool that you would recommend for a beginner, someone who is not a professional, just polishing their own vehicles at home? What would be the tool of choice, or what you would recommend for someone just starting out and they're only doing their own vehicles, not as a profession?
Yeah, I leave this to Jason and Todd because I know, because I've been told, I was not there, but I know that there have been many discussions about you too, about what's the best tool for a newbie, for someone who's learning, who's starting. So I don't know.
I'll take this. I would narrow it down to one of two of our tools in our family of polishers. So it would either be the 15 millimeter Bigfoot orbital polisher or the gear-driven melee polisher. I think in both cases, that's a very good first tool for a beginner.
Todd?
I agree. I agree 100%. I think it depends on the person. If they're going to invest a little bit of time, I think the 15 is a great tool, but it's a little bit more technical. You have to hold it flat. You have to follow the contour of the body. The advantage of the melee is that you can just use it, right? You literally just make sure it's moving and do a good job, and it's going to give you a pretty good result. Mm-hmm. There's not a lot of variability in terms of skill, and I think that's why a lot of people gravitate towards that style of tool. It's just mash it in the paint, rip out defects. It doesn't, so I would agree completely with Jason. Either the melee or the 15 Mark III.
There's one tool which is always neglected, forgotten.
Mm.
But it's a good tool for someone who's starting.
I think I know what you're going to say.
I agree with Todd. 15 is a very easy tool to use, but a little bit technical because you need to, you have this stroke with 15 millimeters, but there's one which has the same plate, the same dimension of the pad of the 15, but with slightly smaller stroke, and it's the Duetto. Many times we forget about that, but I think that especially if someone is not 100% professional, but it's a do-it-yourself, it's someone who is passionate, but it's not going to buy 2-3 different tools, Duetto can be a good solution. Very good in terms of finish, very good in terms of easy of use, slightly less cutting than the 15, the 21, but okay, if I'm a do-it-yourself, I don't really care about the time. I can spend 5 more minutes to remove defects, and consider that it's an option as well.
Yeah,
I would agree. It's a very underappreciated and under discussed tool, but very, very effective, very, very good tool. And those people who do have it love it. It's just does not maybe get as much attention as the 15 and the 21. All right, moving along quickly here. A couple more we can answer. We have a question on during the test spot. How would be some ways to know if the paint is hard, soft, medium, sticky? What things should you look for in your test spot to diagnose the paint? What are the most obvious clues about what you're dealing with?
I think Jason already answered, but it's quite a few times we didn't hear anything from Daniel. So Daniel, how can you, during a test spot, how do you teach to your class?
For me, it's already a point that we discussed previously, but one test that I like to do is the nail test. So putting the nail on the clear coat and see if the clear coat is more elastic or if it's very hard. So here you can have a first approach if you're working on a high solid clear coat or on a soft clear coat. And but at the end, we need to find the right solution. Even it's a soft or a high solid clear coat, we need to find the right solution to polish to polish the surface. And I think this we already discussed it in the previous topics.
Yeah, I agree with you. I also do the nail test. The only thing always to keep in mind, don't do it in the very center of the panel. Look for some places not really very visible. Just that's the only suggestion I can give.
I would
you mean a fingernail test?
Yeah, fingernail, not a nail.
Food leg.
Yes. I'd add one thing to that too. It's something very simple to look for in your test spot, especially if you use something like our yellow foam and ceramic or in a fine to medium compound, is if you see a significant amount of hazing, especially on black, that's probably a good indication you're on a soft or at least a haze-prone paint. That's a very, very big tip. If it comes out very clear, it tends to be probably on the medium to more hard side in most cases. It's not always true, and this is one of those things, it's a variable, but I would say look for that haze, and that's usually a very good indication you're on softer paint.
Okay, let's go for the next question.
All right, let's see, try to pick a few good ones for us. How often should someone clean their pad during the process of paint correction?
Well, Todd was talking about this before, so I would ask him.
Well, there's no such thing as too often, right? So when I polish a car, I like compressed air, and I keep the nozzle in my pocket, and I clean my pad after every single application, always. It doesn't matter the pad type, doesn't microfiber, wool, foam, and I always say, cleaner is better, period. But if this opportunity doesn't exist, or you're polishing in an area where you have to walk outside to blow out the pad because you can't get dust in the environment, or I think at a minimum you want to clean it after maybe 4 applications. And that depends on the pad also, right? The more aggressive the process, the more you need to clean it, because the more paint residue. And also microfiber, the nature of microfiber is to grab particles and hold on to them. So a microfiber needs to be cleaned more often than wool and more often than foam. But clean it as often as you can. That the 10-second investment of time to clean your pad with compressed air will absolutely return itself in the results. You always, in my opinion, go faster by cleaning more. So it's one of those things you spend a little more time to go much faster.
Yeah, what he said.
Yeah, I would agree with that. No, nothing to add to that. Stuff in another one here. So someone has a question. If they have used the same pad and compound and machine on one area twice already, and they're not seeing the defects go away quickly or even at all, should they continue to use the same process, or is that a time to increase or change to a different pad and compound combination? So recommended more passes with the same, or change to something more aggressive and just forget the first combination?
Jason.
Yeah, I think paint thickness would come into this decision, so I think we should measure how much paint we have. But generally speaking, what you're describing is the result of a test spot, and if you're not removing as many of your target defects that you would like, then kick it up a notch. I'd go more aggressive pad or liquid.
There is an option also to make adjustments to your technique, and one of the things we teach in the intermediate to advanced classes is, making changes to pressure or angle or section size. So there are other options. So sometimes you're maxed out. You're using a wool pad with an aggressive compound, and again, in this case, I would think sanding is the next logical progression, but there may be an adjustment you can make the technique to get you the results you want without adding another pass.
Yeah, good point.
Definitely. Okay, I think this probably, Fabrizio, can be our last question, and it goes back to the concept of heat. We had a number of questions about dieback, paint swell. Questions like, is it actually a thing? Does it really happen? And how do you address it? So I think the simple answer is probably, and I'll inject this now, is reduce the amount of heat that you're introducing. But talk a little bit about paint swell and how maybe somebody could adjust or prevent it or address it once it does happen.
Yeah, I was going to say that when we were discussing about paint thickness, many times if you measure the paint thickness before and after polishing, which is what most people do to understand how much they removed, you will see an increase of the thickness. Because when you heat the paint, especially if the paint is fresh, relatively fresh or soft, you will see it swell. So the thickness after polishing, so after you have removed material, the thickness will be higher than before, which makes no sense apparently, but this is something that happens on a physical scale, on a microscopical scale. So this is, paint swell is a phenomenon that happens. Now, how to deal with it, how to prevent as much as we can dieback. So Jason, I'd like you to explain the people who are watching what is dieback, what you intend with dieback in English, and eventually we can hear from Todd and from Daniel how to prevent, or you can tell us.
Yeah, so dieback is a term used to describe a paint condition where the technician has polished the paint, Visually, it looks complete and finished. Defects are removed. And then later over time or after cleaning the panel, defects magically come back. And by this we mean sanding marks come back, or a swirl mark comes back, or a pad mark comes back. And the reality of dieback is that it never really went away and then came back. That's not what happens here. But if you have a scratch on a finish and you have paint swelling occurring, you can visually lose visibility of a defect. And then when the paint outgasses and settles down, you can visually see that defect again. So that's what dieback means. To control this, and this really is a variable, another one of the many paint variables. So dieback happens on some paint, it doesn't happen on others. So it's not a consistent phenomenon on paint. And it mostly happens on refinish paint, although it does happen on factory applied paint sometimes. But just understand that it's a variable. It's not a constant across all paints. So when you are experiencing this, to Dylan's point, you definitely want to adjust technique so that you reduce the heat as a result of friction. So unfortunately with polishing, we cannot have one without the other. So the heat is a byproduct of the friction, but we need to polish in such a way to manage heat, and then you can manage dieback.
Todd, I know you have a lot of experience on different paints. Which paints are more likely to give this dieback?
Any aftermarket paint, any body shop paint that's been over applied or incorrectly mixed is the biggest culprit, right? So, and it's a big problem in the body shop. The paint manufacturer will spec a certain thickness in microns or mils or whatever it is, and then the painter will hose on a level of clear coat and it never cures. So now the paint's very elastic, so anytime you apply friction to it, it swells up. The analogy I use is a balloon, because if it's deflated, it's wrinkled, and then when you blow it up, it's smooth, and now you cannot correct it until it's deflated again. So any aftermarket paint that's improperly applied is a problem. On factory cars in the United States, and I know there is a difference, but we see this a lot on Subarus, on some Hondas. When I'm in South America, this is a problem. I know Jason has run into this in Asia. Because the paints are so soft and they're so elastic and they're heating up so quickly with friction that they immediately expand. And this is a case that kind of touched on something we've all touched on earlier, or to go back to something we've all touched on. In this situation, if you're doing a major correction, then sanding really is the best option to progress the finish and remove the defects while really minimizing the heat potential. So in this case, I'm sanding to 3,000 or 5,000, or there's even finer options now.
Very good. So I think this was the last question, right, Dylan? That we are.
Yeah.
We're going back to.
We'll end there. I would also mention, so we have a second session. These fine gentlemen will join us for another session. It will be at 5 p.m. Denver time in the U.S. So if any of you care to participate in that one, you can go to the RUPES USA Facebook page and register for that webinar. We will live stream that one on Facebook as well. So if you want to just watch and observe the questions. But yeah, lots of good questions. And with as many people as we had on today, I appreciate everybody logging in. This was incredible to see where all these questions were coming from all over the world. But unfortunately, we can't answer all of them in this format. So you can definitely reach out to us. Go to either of the websites, rupes.com or rupesusa.com if you're in North America. And you can send us a technical question via email. You can contact us on social media via direct message if there was a question you'd like us to expand on. And we'd be happy to answer those, obviously, individually as we receive them.
So let me thank Dylan for the big help. Let me thank Todd for having been with us. Jason, of course, Daniel. But of course, especially a very special thank to each of you, because without you, this wouldn't have happened. And your questions and your engagement have been really appreciated from us. I hope and I wish all of you a safe period. I don't know, here we say stay at home, and I think it's quite common all over the world today. So I hope we will be able to meet each of you in person very, very soon. Thank you.
And I want to, Fabrizio, before you close completely, I wanted to thank you in advance and Daniel in advance, because the next session we're doing is actually at 1 a.m. your time. So I want to thank you in advance for doing that.
No, that's not
it's our job, so it's a pleasure for us to support each of you. So.
That's when Fabrizio starts eating dinner.
Yeah.
Italian dinner. Thank you, everybody.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you and goodbye.
Ciao.